In 1960, Congo claims independence from Belgium. Leftist leader Patrice Lumumba becomes prime minister. The United States has its eye on the country's vast mineral resources. Lumumba will stay in office just 2 short months.
This was a terrible example to set for the rest of Africa. It was shocking. And he sealed his fate at that moment. He had to be overthrown.
There was a meeting about the 18th of August of 1960, and Eisenhower gave an indication that it would be nice to have Lumumba out of the way.
I was arguing inside the embassy that we could oust Lumumba as prime minister.
But Allan Dulles interpreted this National Security Council meeting that he was given carte blanche to undertake a plot against Lumumba, which they did.
There were instructions to try and do away with Lumumba, and the poison toothpaste was sent to Larry Devlin, the station chief, and he refused to deliver it.
Our officers were not about to get involved in an assassination.
So I was arguing for a political solution, but there were those, I guess, in Washington who felt that other measures were more appropriate.
Allan Dulles ordered Lumumba's assassination. In 1975, congressional inquiry concluded that President Eisenhower had approved the operation. General Mobutu, who had seized power, had Lumumba shot in the head and dumped in a vat of acid. Frank Carlucci, future CIA deputy director, then U.S. Defense Secretary, was posted in Congo during the coup.
They accused me of being responsible for the assassination of Lumumba. It's all absurd, of course, the idea that a very junior Foreign Service officer would sanction the assassination of a prime minister is silly on the face of it.
He escaped from prison, and he was in hiding, and the CIA helped to find him, and then he was turned over to one of his main enemies in the Congo, and he was killed.
CIA was certainly a component in that. What you have to talk about is the way America was run in those days.
The CIA was asked to choose dictators and help them rule over the people.
There are certainly instances, whether they're in Guatemala in the 50s or the Shah, or, early on, where people could argue that CIA involvement was wrong.
Well, whether it was right or wrong, that's a different matter, but that's what the CIA is for, to conduct clandestine operations.
There was an American belief or illusion back there in the 1950s at the time of the agency's involvement in Iran and subsequently in Central America, that the CIA could accomplish anything on the international scene. This mythology was encouraged by people in the agency.
And this gave the CIA an aura of power.
That was a problem that after a while they began to believe their own myth.
They kept their position. They kept their money. They kept their power by being able to tell the President of the United States one thing. In the end, if you're really in trouble, we can come in and overthrow the government. We can come in and replace the government. We can give you that power.
The biggest problem with that is a lot of people at CIA believed it. They believed they were that good. So this guy Castro, this ought to be easy enough.
We thought we could just treat Cuba like a banana republic. And Cuba turned out to be a little bit stronger and a little bit smarter than the American bureaucrats expected.
Y nuestra, de todos, de los revolucionarios, de los patriotas, será la misma suerte. Y de todos será la victoria.
In Cuba, after running dictator Batista out of the country, Fidel Castro nationalizes sugar plantations owned by American companies. Tensions immediately mount. The U.S. halts all loans to Cuba and breaks off diplomatic ties. Cuba strikes a trade agreement with the USSR. Castro defies Washington, openly courting Soviet leader Nikita Khrushchev.
He was setting a very bad example for Latin America. The idea of this small island standing up to Washington and saying they will no longer be a client state, This was shocking.
The day Eisenhower handed over power to John Kennedy, he also gave him a file called the Bay of Pigs. The plot was hatched by Allan Dulles and Richard Nixon, Eisenhower's vice president and Kennedy's opponent in the 1960 presidential race. Kennedy inherited a plan drawn up by the CIA to invade Cuba and oust Castro by landing at the Bay of Pigs.
He approved it. He was looking for ideas, and one of the ideas he approved was the Bay of Pigs, but it turned out to be the Bay of Pigs.
Kennedy comes, just barely takes office. Goes through his inauguration. He's briefed on the Bay of Pigs. He doesn't like it, but he goes with it, and it turns out to be a disaster.
The CIA sent 1,500 inexperienced Cuban exiles on a suicide mission, hoping Kennedy would cave in and send American air power to back them up. But Kennedy refused, and the operation failed. The CIA laid the entire blame for the Bay of Pigs debacle on his shoulders.
The operation was a failure because it was badly run, period.
I think he went along with it because he didn't have any better ideas, and his staff didn't have any better ideas. So he kept on with what he had.
It was a poorly planned military operation, and the intelligence supporting it was not good.
The idea that a small group of people could come in and somehow they could overthrow a regime, I think, underestimated the popularity of Castro in a significant way.
They expected the Cubans to rally to our side, and they did not. And they just didn't have the right military plan and forces to do the job.
The CIA had said it could be done if the United States was willing to support the insurgents militarily. And at the last moment, the administration decided not to provide military support for the Bay of Pigs insurgents, and it failed.
We were angry about the Bay of Pigs because it failed and because we were really to a considerable degree responsible for the operation. But and there certainly would have been people who were irritated and angry at the president.
They hated Kennedy because he did not support the Bay of Pigs enough, in their opinion, especially with air power.
You can't say CIA liked or disliked something. It's got to be certain people or certain groups that might not have. And I'm sure there were people, case officers and division chiefs and other senior officers, who probably didn't like the president. And why not? He was doing things that they didn't like, so they didn't like him.
Just a month after taking over the White House, John Kennedy and younger brother Robert, U.S. Attorney General, give the CIA full power to get rid of Fidel Castro. Sam Halpern is put in charge of Operation Mongoose. Between the failed landing at the Bay of Pigs in 1961 and John Kennedy's assassination 2 years later, Castro escapes 8 assassination attempts, all organized by the CIA.
Kennedy asked for options on Cuba, and the Joint Chiefs of Staff actually proposed to kill Americans in a covert operation that would be made to appear to be a Cuban attack on U.S. soil as an excuse for going to war against Cuba. And this was properly refused.
The CIA at that time was trying to find ways to deal with Castro.
And whether it was 8 or 80 attempts to assassinate Castro or blow up his cigar or something like that.
I mean, ridiculous things. Planting itching powder in his beard, you know, it was just, these were very feckless kinds of things they were thinking about in order to try to weaken his position.
I think there were 20 or 30 attempts against Castro.
I think 8 sounds a little better. I mean, 25, nobody's that lucky. I mean, somebody's, sooner or later. But Kennedy was obsessed with Castro, Robert Kennedy.
I'm not sure which one was the pusher more than anybody else. We dealt mostly with Bobby rather than with Jack.
John F. Kennedy knew about everything. Robert Kennedy knew about everything.
I could never figure it out what made them so anti-Cuba. The only thing I could think of was their own feelings, their own egotism. Here was a problem they couldn't solve, and they never ran up against a problem they couldn't solve. They were always on top of everything. And this one they were not.